He looked at me like...
You guys sound okay? All right.
Like this is your
We're
mom.
good. We'll give Kelly a second to get out. We'll all start together. Oh, are you recording? Okay. She's recording, y'all. So, listen, the title lesson is Faith Demonstration. We're looking at part 2. What we want to do is we want to give a rounded approach because, you know, in the past, where I came from, legalistic kind of church, well, what they did was they took James 2 and they actually made works whatever they needed it to be to control people, you know. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually show where people did opposite things to and still were counted to demonstrate their faith. And so it's not like that, you know. I mean, it's not what James 2 is talking about is not a legalistic code or legalistic ideals or keeping commandments. He's not talking about any of that. But demonstrating your faith is just that. It's demonstrating your faith. And so, for example, if God revealed something you was going to happen and you acted and talked like it was going to happen, then you would be demonstrating your faith. And if you didn't believe that it was necessary for you to prepare for that, you'd still be demonstrating your faith because you'd be trusting in the Lord. And so there's a lot of ways to demonstrate your faith. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break that down. We want to show, first of all, believing what the Lord tells us is what demonstrating our faith is. And so, I mean, you believe it and you act like it. So faith comes by hearing the message, and the message that is heard is what Christ spoke. So that's what we're talking about. That's what faith is hearing a message from Jesus and believing the message, say. And so if we were to look at James 2, one of the things that he says there, and we just took this from Bible Basic English, it says, but a man may say, you have faith and I have works. Let me see your faith without your works, and I will make my faith clear to you by my works. And so the Lord watches what we say and do to determine if we believe something that He's revealed to us. And that's exactly what He was doing with the Israelites when He promised them the land of Canaan. And as He led them to the place, they tempted Him 10 times on the way, acting like they didn't believe a word He was saying. And He punished them all 10 times. But the 10th time, when they refused to go and possess the land because there were giants in it, then He turned them into the wilderness, and they marched 40 years until everyone that didn't believe fell off and died. And so this is what we're saying. We make clear to God, make clear to God and to each other what it is we believe by what we do. Say. And so Joshua and Caleb were like, those giants are bread for us. Let's go up and take it at once. So they were talking and acting like someone that believed that God had given the land. When God's on your side, it doesn't matter there's giants. See? And so this is what faith is. Faith is that God can do anything. You can't limit Him in any way. And if He's going to make a tiny little guy kill a giant like He did David in the valley when he killed Goliath, then He'll do that. And so David killed him with a rock. And so that's the way it is when God's on your side. So the Lord watches what we say and do to determine if we believe what He reveals to us. Now, we're going to show that the record of those Israelis that did not survive the wilderness march, we're just going to look at that record. The New Testament, last week we went into detail of that record. We just want to look at what the New Testament says looking back upon that, okay? In 1 Corinthians 10 it says, moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that our fathers were under the cloud and passed through the sea and were all baptized unto Moses. And so we're saying that was a type of New Testament Christianity when we passed through the watery grave of baptism and we're baptized unto Jesus. So he's saying that God brought those people to Himself. They were baptized unto Moses. Moses was their leader and commander. See? And he says they were baptized in the cloud and the sea. So they had the water of the sea on either side and the cloud above and just passed through the water. And it says, and they did eat that same spiritual meat, because that manna fell from heaven. And it says they did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, that was Christ. And so, you know, a rock can't give water. It was the power of Christ Jesus that made that rock give water. So he's saying they were drinking of that rock that followed them. That rock was Jesus. So with many of them, he says God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were written, these things were our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they lusted. And so he's saying they were overthrown in the wilderness. He says these things were examples, what happened to them. Their examples of unbelief were examples. Also the evil they did, the mistakes they made were our examples also. Now he talks about some of those things. He says don't be idolaters like they were. We're still in 1 Corinthians 10. And so these things were written for our admonition, he'll teach us, see. And so he says, don't be idolaters like they were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play, and that's when they made the golden calf, you recall. So they started worshiping strange gods, got up and started dancing. And so he says, don't commit fornication, as some of them committed. And so they actually forsook the God's laws, and they just were behaving very, very badly. And that 23,000 died that day when they forsook the Lord for a calf and started having some kind of wild orgy. So he says, neither let us tempt Christ as some of them tempted. So the Lord followed them. Jesus was back there. He was the Lord that followed them and led them out of the land of Egypt. And he says, don't tempt Christ as some of them tempted and were restored the servants. Now they tempted him 10 times, but the worst time, the time that caused them to go in the wilderness, was when they refused to believe that God had given them a land they could go up and possess it. So that's when they didn't get to go. Everyone that didn't believe didn't get to go in. Okay? So neither murmur ye, as some of them murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. You recall that when he gave them food, they didn't like it. They wanted something else, And so they murmured about whatever, when bread fell from heaven, they murmured about it. So he gave them quail. They got tired of that too. So it says all these things happened to them for samples, and they are written for our admonition. So we can look back there and say, we don't want to be nothing like that, because we would like to go in the millennial time, and we got a wilderness march coming up. We've been studying about that a little bit. But ours is only 3.5 years. And so he says, these are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So the end of the age will come upon these people. They're written for our admonition. And this is important, because this is where we are. We're at the end of the age. And so this is for our admonition of how we should act coming into the end of this age. See? So the ones that fell were demonstrating their unbelief, and that's why they fell. Now what he says in Hebrews chapter 4, there remains a rest for us. He says if Jesus, this is spelled the same as Joshua, and that's what he's talking about, Joshua. If Joshua had given them rest, because Joshua led them into the land of Canaan, there would not have been afterwards spoken of another day. So after the children of Israel had been in the land for a long time, we see that David wrote there remains a rest for the people of God. And so the author of the Hebrew letter is pointing that out. They were already in the physical land of Canaan, but David started writing about a rest that remains for the people of God. There's still a promise where we can enter into his rest. So there's a future rest both to the millennial time and ultimately heaven, where we rest, where we enter into God's rest. For he that is entered into his rest has also ceased from his own works as God did from his, just like God rested when he created the heavens and the earth and the animals and all the things that are in the earth. On the seventh day he rested. And so we're at the end of our 6,000th year. There's going to be 1,000 years of rest. The 7,000th year. As we enter in, after the 6,000 years are expired, there will be 1,000 years that it will be also resemble, this millennial time will resemble that rest. We are going to enter into that rest. But also there's an ultimate rest in heaven. We enter into that also. And so he says, let us labor. And so he's saying, don't earn it, but show your faith by what we say and do. Labor that way. Therefore, to enter that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. Now, you see what he's saying? That when you act like you don't believe, that's counted for unbelief. So he says, don't have this example of unbelief. Whatever the Lord reveals to you, believe that and conduct yourself as someone that believes that, or it doesn't count as belief. All right. Now, there are different ways that we can hear a message from the Lord, and there are different ways we can demonstrate our faith, and that's important to know. You may not demonstrate your faith the same way I demonstrate mine. And the Bible's clear that there are people that did opposite things, and both were counted for faith. Okay? And we'll show that before we're through. So there are different ways we can hear a message from the Lord. There are different ways we can demonstrate our faith in that message. We can, for example, hear others say they heard God say something. Okay? An example of that, as we look in here in this account of Joshua chapter 2, you can hear a true rumor and believe it and act on it, and it can be counted for faith demonstration. See, that's the case of Rahab. Now, we're going to show you that that's the case, okay? In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 through 14, it says, And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land. Now, this is after they come out of the wilderness march, say. They've already been in there. All the unbelievers already fell off. Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came to this harlot's house named Rahab. And they lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. So Rahab was, she was a citizen of Jericho. And so the king sent to her and said, where are these men at? We've heard that they told the king that the children of Israel had come to spy out the country, to search it out, and they knew that an attack would follow. And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are coming to thee, which will enter into thy house, for they are come to search out all the country. And the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, They came to me, but I wist not where they were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Now she's telling a big fat lie. And I want you to know that. God doesn't see things the way we see them. So she's telling a big fat lie. She said they came, and I don't know where they are. When it came time to shut the gate, he says, when it was dark, the men went out. And he says, she's saying, well, if you hurry up, you can catch them. They're hiding in her roof. Okay? So whither the men went, I would not, but pursue after them quickly, and you'll overtake them. And so she had brought them up on the roof of the house and hid them in stalks of flax. That's kind of how they kept the water off of them. They'd bundle up grass and stack it. Well, she just let them lay upon the poles and covered them with those bundles of grass. And she hid them in the stalks of flax, which she laid in order upon the roof. And so they were in there in that hot flax for a while. And the men pursued after them the way of Jordan and to the fords, and as soon as they were pursued after them, they were gone out, they shut the gate. So while they were all distracted chasing what you might say a wild goose, then before they were laid down, the scriptures explain, she came to them upon the roof, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land. Nobody told her. She knew it. She heard it in a rumor. God didn't tell her. That's the point I'm trying to make. She heard about it, but she didn't hear about it from God. She didn't even hear about it from the people that God told. She heard about it from people that heard it from people that God told. That's the way she heard it. So she says that, I know that God's given you the land. 40 years ago, God couldn't even get His own people to believe what this harlot's believing. See? And she says, and that your terror is fallen upon us. We're all afraid of y'all. And that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. See, she's perceiving that this is a true rumor. And he says, we've heard. She just heard it. We have heard how that the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea a long time ago, like 40-something years ago. We heard that the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, and when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, we heard about that were on the other side of Jordan, the Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God of heaven above and on earth beneath. She is immoral for whatever reason, maybe hardship. She's a harlot. And yet, words like this pour out of her mouth. Your God, He is the God of heaven above and the earth beneath. And God has given you the land, and we're in it. So she says, now therefore I pray you swear to me by this same Lord, since I have showed you this kindness, that you will also show kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token that you'll keep your oath, that ye will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all they have and deliver our lives from death. She's not just trying to save her own hide. So the whole family's being saved by the harlot that they probably look down at. She's saying, don't just save me, save my father and my mother and my brother and my sisters and everybody that's part of their family. Save us all because of this. And they swear. And the men answered her, our lives for yours, if you utter not our business. If you will not tell where we are, don't give us up. Our lives for yours if something happens to you. That's the oath. And it shall be that when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you. So if only the children of Israel had this kind of faith. She just heard it. God told them. God told them. They saw all the miracles that God did. And she didn't see any of it, but she heard about it. And so if only the children of Israel had this kind of faith 40 years prior, they would not fallen in the wilderness. They would come in with Joshua. The Lord regarded not the lie that she told, nor her occupation at the time she demonstrated her faith. I just want you to point that out. I want to point that out to you, Not the lie she told, nor the occupation that she was in. He didn't regard it. All right. Judgment falls on Jericho. So in Joshua 6 it says the people shouted and the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. They utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman and young and old and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said to the two men that spied out the country, he told them, go to the harlot's house and bring out the harlot and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her. So before the city fell down flat, they snuck in and brought out her and her family and all that she had before the city was attacked. It's important to know, because when the young people go to school now, they try to talk about how God's bad because He killed little children. And what we know about this is that the people in the land of Canaan were mixing people with other things, and that there were hybrid animals. And so what He did is He destroyed and purged out the Nephilim DNA. Every city was not destroyed like that. Just the ones that had been corrupted by the fallen angels and by what animals had been crossed. And so that whenever the animals and the people, young and old, are destroyed, He's purging the DNA. And that's what He was doing. And so, I'm reminded of what the Lord said, is that there's going to come a day that people are going to want to bring up these things in judgment. Reason why they didn't want to serve Him. And He's going to come out victorious, that He was innocent of any wrongdoing. And He'll be able to show that. People don't know why He did that. They just looking for a reason to not serve God because of their own wickedness. And so we're just pointing out that He didn't do this with every city. He did this where the DNA was corrupted. Okay? Now, God regarded not her immoral state, but saved her because of her faith. Now, when we look at in Joshua 23, it says 6:23, it says the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelt in Israel even to this day. Now what's important to see is that she did not just save her hide. She did not just save her hide whenever she was brought out. What's important to know is that she became an Israelite. She dwelt in the land of Israel for the rest of her life. And it's also important to know, we don't find out to the New Testament, that she married an Israelite and that she is in the lineage of Christ. Rahab is. You can find her in the record where it talks about the lineage of Christ. And it'll tell you that one of the children were begat by Rahab. And so it's misspelled in the King James Version, but that's her. Okay? And so Joshua sent to spy out, because she hid the messengers that Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Now look, in the New Testament it points out, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she received the spies with peace. And so the New Testament again lists her in the hall of faith as someone that did not die with those that did not believe. See, she believed. So there was Israel that fell in the wilderness because they didn't believe. There were people in Jericho that fell because they did not believe. But she, by her faith, did not perish with them that didn't believe. And this was a faith that she demonstrated when she hid the spies and required an oath. Now, we can get a message from God if He speaks to you. That, God, I don't limit God, don't put Him in a box. I've had Jesus speak to me in a dream twice. And so, we can get a message from God if He speaks to us. Abraham was such a person. God speaks to Abraham in Genesis chapter 21. He says, "And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast. And the same day Isaac was weaned, that Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which had been born unto Abraham, mocking." So Ishmael's a lot older than Abraham, and Abraham's having his first birthday party, and this kid's mocking him. And Sarah gets really angry about it, and she's told Abraham to cast out this bondwoman with her son, because this son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And this thing was grievous to Abraham because that was his son, and he loved Ishmael. But He spoke to Abraham, and He said to Abraham, "Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad." He's talking about Ishmael. "And because of the bondwoman." He says, "And all that Sarah has said unto you, hearken to her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called." So what he did is he made Isaac a promise. And what he's saying, he made Abraham a promise about Isaac. He said, all of your seed, the seed of promise, is going to come through Isaac. This was in chapter 21, as we can see, 8 through 12. All right. Next thing God does is test his faith in that promise. And so later God tested Abraham, and He called Abraham. He said, "Yes, here I am." And he answered. God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to Moriah." Now that's where that's where the Temple Mount is, Mount Moriah. And He says, "Go to Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you." And so we see in verse 5 that Abraham said to his servants, whenever he saddled his ass, he packed his son and all that, and he went to Mount Moriah. But look what he tells his servants: "You stay here with the donkey while the boy and I go over there and worship, and after that, we'll come back to you." It's important to know that what Abraham's doing, he knows what God told him, that through Isaac everything's going to happen. And so what we find out in Hebrews chapter 11, that by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac as he that received him, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Everybody knows what that meant. Abraham knew, the Hebrew writer knew, God knew, everybody knew what that meant. And so it says in verse 19 that Abraham, what was in his mind, that he was accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, even as he received him after he got too old to have a kid. And so he's saying, if God said all the promises will come through Isaac, then I'm going to obey Him, and we'll be back. So that's the faith that he had. And so what he did is he believed God's promise, and he conducted himself as someone that believed that under dire bad circumstances. Okay? So he was faithful. So it is these two records, Abraham and Rahab, that James uses to explain what demonstrating our faith is. So I want to take you through that, because the views of the churches that I came from are so warped and perverted that you can't even get the true meaning of James chapter 2. And so what we want to do is just look at what he actually says. You believe there's one God? That's fine. The demons believe that. So believing is not what God wants. Believing and acting like it is what He wants. Okay? Demons can do what some people do and call themselves a Christian. Just believe. That has never been what He's asked for. He's asked us to believe and act like we believe. Okay? And so he said the demons believe and tremble with fear. So you can actually be a human and believe and have a reason to tremble with fear too. Because you just got demon faith. So it's more than just believing that gets us to accept it of God. It's believing and acting like we believe. So he says, you fool, do you not have to be shown that faith does nothing, that faith that does nothing is useless? And so this is what the author is saying, that faith that does not act like faith is useless. Didn't our ancestor Abraham receive God's approval as a result of what he did when he offered up his son Isaac as a sacrifice on the altar? So he was demonstrating his faith, and he never actually had to touch his son. But God said he's going to if I don't stop him. So it was enough. He never had to touch his son. But he was going to if God didn't stop him. And so you see that Abraham's faith and what he did work together. His faith was shown to be genuine by what he did. And that's what's important. And that's why I want to show you this from a modern version. Is because this is really what's happening here. Is that you see that Abraham's faith and what he did work together. His faith was shown to be genuine by what he was doing. And it's the same with all faith. The scripture passage came true. It says Abraham believed God. And that faith was regarded by God to be his approval of Abraham. So Abraham was called God's friend. And so the King James Version also says that it was imputed to him for righteousness. His faith was counted to him for righteousness. And so this is what God does in the New Testament. It's a very big deal. Imputed righteousness is talked about in Romans chapter 4. And so he's saying that I count my people righteous when they believe my promises and act like it. That's what Abraham was doing. So he says, you see that a person receives God's approval because of what he does and not only because of what he believes. See? And so, and I'm just making a point that legalistic churches will take this chapter, James chapter 2, and try to define works as whatever they need it to be, to bring you under some kind of crazy control, to do certain little things that they want you to do that makes you different than everybody else, that makes you the true church. Okay? That's not what any of this is about. None of it. What this is about is believing God's promises and acting like it. And so the same is true as he brings in both Abraham and Rahab. Say, pick up 24 again. You see that a person received God's approval because of what he does and not only because of what he believes. The same is true of the prostitute Rahab, who welcomed the spies and sent them away on another road. She received God's approval because of what she did. Now see, if this was talking about keeping God's commandments, she failed on two of them. First, she was a fornicator, and second, she was a liar. But the Bible is saying the fornicating liar got God's approval. It has nothing to do with self-righteousness. What she did that separated her from the other lying fornicators of the world was she believed God's promise and acted like it. And this of course led to a reformed life. She became a married person. The rest of her life sprung forth from this faith that she showed right here. And so we find her living in Israel, worshiping the God of Israel, and even becoming, her faith has put her in a position of honor to be in the lineage of Christ. And so I'm not saying she stayed a lying fornicator. I'm just saying she was demonstrating her faith in a really unusual way. But it was still counted to her for righteousness, and she was rewarded for it. And so a body that doesn't breathe is dead. In the same way, faith that does nothing is dead. So we're just saying that a faith that acts on what it believes is a living faith. A faith that does nothing is dead, and that's what this is talking about. Okay, it's not talking about faith plus all your commandment keeps and gets you salvation. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about faith that acts like faith. All right? Now, you can hear about a dream from someone else and believe it and act on it. This was the case of Pharaoh and Joseph. Pharaoh told his dream to Joseph. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, the kine are cattle, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, and they were poor and very ill-favored and very lean-fleshed. such as never I saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-flavored kind did eat up the first 7 fat kind. And he says, and when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had done eating them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning, so I woke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted, with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears, and I told this unto the magicians, but none of them could declare to me what it meant. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one dream, or one event, and God has showed Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good kind are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin, ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing that I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he shows unto Pharaoh. So we can see God is showing Pharaoh what he's about to do, and Joseph is telling him what it means. So this is about belief. Belief was shown by preparing for this famine in this case. And so in verse 29 it says, behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And then there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and all the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh, by giving him the kind and the corn. And it says, for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, and it was because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up a 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for the store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. So faith demonstration. And so verse 46, it says, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up food in the cities, and the food in the field, the food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left off numbering, for it was without number. In other words, he tried to count it at first, and then he just lost count. There was no way to count it. See, and then he says in the 7, we just want to point out, preparing is not worrying. Joseph didn't worry about anything, but he did prepare. Okay? And so, in the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended, and the 7 years of dearth began to come. And according to Joseph, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, and whatever he says to do, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened the storehouses and sowed unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to Joseph to buy corn because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. So in this situation where God warned Joseph ahead of time so he could prepare, and he did not just prepare for himself and for Egypt, he prepared for the whole world to eat. Okay? And so God provided the means, and he prepared for everybody. And that's what he did. All right? Now, in Philippians 2, it's true. Philippians 4, this is just daily living. Don't worry about anything, but in every situation, let God know what you need in prayer. You can tell God what you need. Okay? But don't worry about it. Tell Him what you need. We do have needs. And you can request it while giving thanks. Then God's peace, which goes beyond anything you can imagine, will guard your thoughts and your emotions through Jesus Christ. Now, here's a situation that's just right opposite of what Joseph did. It's a situation where someone couldn't help themselves. Okay? Some people can't afford to prepare and are counted to have faith. In this case, in Mark 12, Jesus sat over against the treasury and he beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many there were that were casting in much. And there came this poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called his disciples, and he said to them, I say unto you, this poor widow hath cast in more than they all, which have cast in the treasury. Because they all were casting in their abundance. They were very rich, and they were casting in their abundance. But she cast in all she had. That's it. That's all she had. So what's different about this person is she was trusting God. What she could have bought one more something to eat with, she cast it in the treasury. And she had to trust in God for whatever was coming next, because she just gave her last to the treasury. And Joseph prepared and acted on his faith in the dream. The widow woman gave her last coins to the temple with no means to buy food and was counted to have faith because she trusted in God. These two people did opposite things and were acting on faith. And so I think it's important to note, there are different ways to show your faith in God. They both did that, but they did it different ways. And there are some ways, sometimes you can't even find an example in the Bible for how you can demonstrate your faith in God. Many times God reveals things to us, things that are very personal to ourselves. And when we act upon those things, then that's showing faith. And so that is what we're up against. These are the last days. There are things that God is revealing to us because He said He would do that in Joel chapter 2. And so some of us have experienced that. God has revealed some things to us. And we should act upon those things in faith. And whatever you do in action is demonstrating that faith. And we just don't want that faith to be dead. Okay? That's all I'm going to share with you.